Welcome everyone back to the Art of Game Mastery. I'm John. It's my co-host Jack. Uh, this is a show called Finding Paths where we talk about all things Pathfinder and some other stuff too. Um, Before we get started, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, hit the bell if you want to be notified, all that jazz. Really helps us out and gets our videos, shown to the wider audience.
If you're
So,
watching this on Twitch, don't forget to follow us on Twitch right now. If you'll be watching us on YouTube or Odyssey, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe.
yep, that's what I just said. Also on
Take your time.
Mastodon and all that stuff. We'll give the links out at the end of the show, and they'll be in the description on YouTube as well. But yeah, Twitter, Mastodon, Instagram, we're everywhere. So today's show is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be about a question we posed in Reddit, the Pathfinder 2e Reddit, called "What kind of GM are you?" We've got a lot of interesting comments and responses to that. So, Jack, you want to start us off and talk a bit about the different kinds of GMs that you're aware of, and also that the comments have kind of made us aware of?
Absolutely. To start, what kind of GM are you? There are so many different types of GMs out there, and I can't cover them all, but we're going to try. So we want to give credit to where credit is due. A lot of you guys in the Reddit came up with a lot of different things that you guys do, and we're going to try to summarize those and kind of give you guys appellations or titles to describe what kind of GM you are. And one of the first ones, the biggest part of the polling that I noticed was prepping. Prepping seemed to be upfront one of the biggest issues that people complained about, not having enough time to prep, and people talked about over prepping, having more fun prepping than actually playing the game, which I know that happens to some of us. I greatly enjoy prepping. Sometimes prepping can be more fun than playing the game.
I guess we should go talk a little bit about what prepping entails. I mean, for those of you who haven't that much experience as a GM, so prepping can be anything from the world building in a homebrew world to actually planning out the encounters in the individual session. Oftentimes, depending on whether you're running like a sandbox or a pre-written adventure or a more epic, story narrative kind of game, the type of prepping you'll do will change. A lot of people mentioned in the comments on Reddit that a lot of them really like to run sandbox games where a lot of the prep is done up front with the world building. So like they build the world, the universe, whatever genre game they're playing, and then they plan everything out. All the settlements are planned up front. All of the NPCs are planned up front. All the encounters are mostly planned up front, though I imagine some of them are also kind of winged on the fly for filler and whatnot. And I think this is kind of the style of GM you are, Jack, right? I think this is more along the lines of your shtick.
I'm an over prepper. You caught me. I 6 months designing Tagasia before you guys played it, and then we switched over to using an online platform. And so it took me about 2 months after that just to get comfortable using Roll20. And I absolutely love doing the prep work. I noticed some people even consider prepping for modules. Modular work is there's still some prep that needs to go into it. You've got to read that source material. The Paizo keeps pumping out new modules to play, and you've got to have time to read them, know the backstory, know the motivations. Yeah. Otherwise, if you don't know what the motivations are of particular characters, you'll be providing them with a very different experience.
Yeah, I mean, to go along with that, with modules, oftentimes the modules give you an overall framework of the story, but they don't necessarily fill in every gap. So even with like a pre-written adventure from like Paizo, or if you're playing 5e Wizard of the Coast or whatever, there'll often be sections of that module that are just kind of open-ended and left for you to fill in whatever you want. So there is still, I mean, even if you're running a pre-written module, there is still some prep and encounter design and things like that you have to do as a GM. So don't think that just running a pre-written module verbatim is like your pass to not do any prep at all. There's still a lot that goes into it. But another big thing you touched on was going into the digital world. And I think personally I've found that now as I play a digital game or GM a digital game, the amount of prep I have to do for a digital game far outweighs that I have to do for the same game in pen and paper. Because when I'm playing a pen and paper game, I still have battle maps and whatnot, but they're much more crude. They're usually drawn on the fly, like like one of
Mhm.
those Chessex battle grids where you just kind of take a wet erase marker and draw out a rough map. So none of that stuff needs to be done in advance. Whereas with like a digital game like on Roll20 or Foundry or whatever, um, I think people expect more. So you have to build out
Yeah.
all of your, or at least find all of your, um, yeah, Digimon references abound, right? But at least you find all of your maps and tokens and you know tiles and everything. Then you have to build in all your lighting and all. I think players have now expect more from a GM on a digital medium than they would in a pen and paper medium, and I think that's
Um,
a
I'm not gonna
problem.
lie, John. I feel the exact same way. Our Minds of Fendelver games, I
Hmm.
showed up with nothing.
Yeah,
I I know I'm definitely in the minority, and I want you guys to crucify me in the comments. I don't own any dice,
yeah. Jack is full
and
on digital. He uses digital dice even when he plays, so even like in
yeah,
person. So
I've before I wasn't even using digital dice. I was just kind of taking an average and kind of going with the flow of the game. So some of that damage was just like pre-calculated. Um, it's just like rolling dice in your head, kind of deciding the rules for it. Some of you guys liked that for Minds of Fendelver, and then yeah, no dice. Yeah, some people would say that's a deal breaker.
yeah.
No dice.
I mean, if
Uh,
that's your thing, it's a perfectly viable way of playing. Just make sure you're up front with your players when you start the game, letting them know what's going down.
but the
Um,
dice is an important part that leads into after prepping, a different style of GMing is one of the biggest things that people talked about was rolling in front of their players.
mhm.
And I think you and I both agree we're on the same front for this, but we like to roll in front of everybody, very open. I think John, you like to do some secret rolls.
I do in Pathfinder 2e just because I feel that the way they're designed makes sense. Um, like for instance, one place I will use secret rolls is with stealth checks. Um, so like if I have an NPC who's doing a stealth check against someone's perception DC, I would rather the player not know that that check happened until it's relevant. You know what I mean? Because if they know a check was made, then they're wondering, okay, well, something's there. Did it pass or fail? What happened? Kind of deal. And that might influence the way they play. To some people, that's okay. And to me, I just like having that ambiguity there that the players don't know what's going to come until it's right in front of them, kind of deal. And that's kind of like the purpose of stealth, in my opinion. So that's one place where I will use secret roles. But then in like 5e, where secret roles aren't a thing, I won't use them. I only
Mm.
use them in games where it's part of the rules. As we'll get to later, there's another style of GMing that differs a lot. Is the rules focus, but yes, but other than
Yeah.
that, when I'm playing online, I definitely roll in the open. When I'm playing in person, I typically roll behind a GM screen, not because I'm trying to hide anything, but because I usually have a GM screen because I use it as a reference, and it's just right there. And it's easier to roll right in front of me and behind the screen than it is to roll in front of the players. So I mean, it's not really because I'm trying to hide anything. I don't really fudge rolls or anything typically. So um, yeah,
Well, you just said the big F word that I was going to cover next. Um, Before I leap into that, the big F word, I saw a lot of talk about it.
yeah.
I love rolling in front of everybody, and especially like for stealth rolls or secret rolls, I still roll them in front of everybody.
Hmm.
I have this idea that when you're hiding and you're kind of aware of what you're doing, I'd like to think you are, unless you now won that stuff. Um, I feel like you kind of can gauge your reactions from people and hearing what they roll, seeing what the GM rolls for those NPCs that might spot you, the guards, they're
Hmm.
they're moving around. You can kind of gauge their reaction, I think. And some of those things I like to do is kind of it's a bit taunting your players. You kind of do some extra rolls on the side GMs, I recommend you do this. I know it might not be your style, but roll all the time. Have some extra dice being rolled.
Yeah, I
I
do
know
that as
GMs like
well, that
behind the
attention, but I
screen.
usually do it behind a screen. I don't do it on online games, actually, just because I don't know why I don't do it on online
Maybe it just clogs up the dialogue
games.
feed.
Yeah, I don't know.
Since I could see that being a thing, but I know players like to see the GM making rolls behind the
Hmm.
behind that screen, and I'm constantly doing rolls for determining weather and determining guard rotations,
Yeah.
NPCs' lives, the stock
I
of
use a
their
lot of
wares.
wandering encounters, random encounter tables, stuff like that in some of my games. So
I didn't see that get brought up in the Reddit at all. Very few people talked about wandering monsters.
I think it's a
You know,
thing of the past these days. I don't think too many
I
games
use
use them,
wandering
to be honest.
monsters. Do you use wandering monsters still?
Me? Yeah, I use them in Shifting Sands all the time.
Okay, right. So those encounters where we fought those shock bugs, that was just right off a table.
Hmm.
I don't use the random encounters anymore. I maybe I've just over prepped with my sandboxing, but I literally put the
I
monsters
I
down on
prep I
the.
prep the tables so I know I have an idea of what's going to be on come out of them somehow. But I like the variation of like every time you guys are traveling, I determine what's the weather like, what's you know do you encounter anything, and if you do, what is it kind of deal, and that every time you do it, it's something different. So it just kind of adds some variation. Even surprises me sometimes what the outcome is.
Well, I mean, you got to have fun too, right?
Yeah.
So
But
back to the. You ready or no?
yeah, I was gonna say just one thing you kind of alluded to there with the dice rolling is that I do think a lot of GMs not overroll the dice, but over ask for dice rolls. I'm of the opinion that if something isn't A, interesting, or B, has consequences, then it's not even worth rolling the dice. Um, like if it's a roll that you're just going to give them anyway, or like they're going to get right no matter what they roll, then don't even make them roll. Like just don't waste the time of anyone. Rolling's fun, but I would rather the rolling be spent on actually interesting outcomes than it would be spent on just random fluff. And that's kind of something I've taken from Fate as well, because I used to be very much a over roller person. So
I think I'm in the category of over rolling. I like the math rocks that go clink, and I know a lot of
click
players
that.
like to make
Yeah.
math rocks go clink. And I don't know. I like that the thought that there's a 5% chance that you're gonna mulligan, and especially in Pathfinder, it's not nearly as bad, not nearly as painful. What with hero points being part of the game, um, I think for a GM, it can be useful to kind of help sift through those hero points if your party is just plowing through using the hero points constantly. That can kind of put them a little more on safeguard if that's a problem for
So I have
balancing
a
your
theory
table.
with hero points. This kind of goes off topic a little bit, but I've
Let's
noticed
do
in all the games we play and GM in, hero points. You get that one at the start of the session. We typically don't give out more throughout the session. You know what I mean? Like unless it's a very very extravagant thing. But to me, that ends up meaning that people save that hero point for like that one big moment, and then we don't usually give out any more at the end. I think that's something as GMs, both you and I can get better at. So I think my theory is it may end up working more like fate points and fate, where there's like an ebb and flow of them. So
it.
if you give them out more, then people will be more willing to use them. And then one thing I don't like about Pathfinder is there's no way for a GM to use hero points. I feel like if the GM had villain points, as like you like to call them, and you could use those, you have a pool of villain points throughout the whole session that you use for any monster. This is more of a Fate style thing for those of you familiar with Fate core. It may uh, it may make the hero point thing more usable. You know what I mean? Like I feel like it'd be more of an interesting mechanic there.
I was starting to feel like a narcissist mad god Shagorath using my villain points, but I don't know. There's a part of theatrics. Also, I'm surprised wasn't brought up in Reddit. Very few people talked about the showmanship, and uh, I was a geeky nerd, loved drama, and I loved the acting part. And I kind of never take off the GM face mask with you guys. I'm constantly kind of upping the ante and building the suspense, building the tension. And having villain points is amazing for that. I feel like you guys are very like motivated and focused on the game, and I really feel like I have like everybody's attention. And to kind of build up those stakes with villain points, I really feel like that's an extra tool in your GM toolbox.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, I'd really like to like sit down and play around with the hero point system and see if I can find a better homebrew solution there.
the hero points is a cool idea,
Yeah.
but it's so novel, it's so new,
Yeah.
and I feel like maybe you could use some tweaking in everyone's individual game.
Yeah.
About when that first game that we played back at the brew, what was that place called?
Oh man, I forget.
That was a great
Gamecraft, I think it was called.
Gamecraft. That you guys, I hope you guys are open. I can't wait to go back and check you guys out again.
They are open again, by the way. I heard a friend talking about it. So.
We got to go back there sometime.
I'll be in town soon, so stop by for the time's sake.
Absolutely. When we were there at that game, you handed out the initial hero points. We had played for about an hour, about one drink in, and you dished out more hero points.
Mhm.
And I had not used my hero points at all. And I was still really iffy and confused by hero points. And this is where I kind of went on the Dark Souls mode of Pathfinder playing, when I was like, I don't think I like hero points, and so I don't use them.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think, as rules is written, they're that great in execution, but yes, exactly.
That's John. That's John, mind you. John was handing out the hero points.
Yeah. But I think there's potential there. I like the concept. I just think it needs some tweaking. But anyway, I don't want to derail this too much with hero point talk. But I think maybe one style GMing could be that whether you're okay with things like hero points, because they do break the game sometimes.
The part that breaks the game the most, and I think it should be mentioned, is end game, where you hear the players. It's not necessarily metagaming, but they're like, "Hey, we've only got X amount of time left in this session. It is time to cash out those hero points because they're not gonna. There's no rollover minutes. Okay, this isn't AT&T." And there's also this mindset where one thing that kind of felt power gaming was one of our friends in game was saying, hey, this session is about to end. Let's not start the conflict, and let's wait till next session when we all have fresh hero points again.
Yeah.
So they said that in game. You know they did. Yeah. So, but let's get back to types of GM that you are. The big F is fudging dice results.
Yeah.
That was one of the biggest topics on the Reddit in the comments section.
So this one's interesting. This has been a debate between game masters since the early days.
Yep.
This is like the age-old one. I am willing to put money on saying that even the people who say they would never do it have done it at least once in their lives.
Okay, yes. Everyone's done it at least once.
Yeah. I don't like to do it. I don't typically do it. But I have done it before, admittedly. Typically, it's to avoid a TPK in a group that I know would react very badly to a TPK. And I think that sometimes that's okay. I think as long as you don't use that power, then it's fine. But it kind of goes back to what I was saying. If you don't want the outcome to be, if you don't expect the outcome to be random, and you're not okay with the consequences that could come of that, then don't roll. Like, why are you rolling dice if you're not okay with, the outcome being bad?
The mentality is the why are you not okay with the end result? Because I'm always okay with the end result, which is why I'm always making you guys roll. There have been times where I've been like, you know what? Actually, I take that back. I don't want you to roll. And so even though I say, you should be comfortable with these rolls if you're making them, we make mistakes.
Yeah.
We're doing all this on the fly. We're improving. We're winging it. And I feel like the GM and the players should be given some sort of leeway where we can be like, hey, can I take this back? Can I walk this back? And then there's always that moment where we're like, the next turn happens and you're like, hey, wait a second, that guy's flanking. Shouldn't I be getting a +2? And the GM will be like, hey, actually, this guy should have gotten an attack opportunity. We're playing a crunchy game. So we should be a little more understanding with the rules. So I feel like that gets kind of falls under the part of fudging, where people don't realize that like some GMs will be like, no, you passed go, you don't collect $200. You were supposed to when you did and you didn't, so it's too late.
There's also consequences for not fudging the dice as well for new GMs or GMs new to a system or something like that. For instance, if you're not really familiar with the encounter design and you're still kind of feeling it out, you're probably going to overdo an encounter. And for instance, one time I kind of screwed up and overdid an encounter, and I didn't fudge the rolls. I just did them all out in the open and took what it was. And poor Sandra, as we've mentioned before, got hit really like a fucking truck and got taken
That was
out
epic.
quick. So
That's part of the game that
yeah,
I really do enjoy. Sometimes you have no control over the dice, and if you get raided by pirates, chances are the first person to see them probably gonna get slaughtered.
yeah,
That's just reality. Had there been a different player up there and they not had backup, the same thing could have happened to them.
yep.
And it just kind of makes the game more realistic when you do that. And
Yeah.
walking it back and trying to undo it, I feel like actually, I don't know. I mean, it depends on the type of game and the type of GM you are. If you're playing a game where you're the heroes and you're the type of GM who wants to, you know, drive that kind of message, then you need to walk it back. You need to walk it back. But
Yeah, I feel
I
like
don't know.
Pathfinder 2e is interesting in the approach it took. Instead of trying to be like you're a lowly person who just started from nothing and then you make your way to being a hero. Pathfinder 2e took it, said, okay, these guys are just heroes straight from the get go. They're not the best heroes straight from the get go, but they're a level one character is far better than any NPC in the game already, and you only goes up from there. So
NPC.
I think that depending on the type of game you're trying to run, I know some people like to play more narrative games where it's almost like you're acting out a movie. You know what I mean? Like where the heroes are so heroic that the concept of them failing, quote unquote, is just unheard of. And I think this is a bad approach to take for a narrative game for multiple situations or multiple reasons. But I think that's a lot of GM styles is they think that the characters failing should not even be an option. Like these are the protagonists of my show. I need to make sure that they're always good. But if you think of movies and stuff like that, the protagonist doesn't always win, right? There's a lot of situations where they reach difficulty or opposition and they don't always come out on top, and that actually leads to very interesting narrative, right? So I think that that's a misconception a lot of GMs have in their approach. But it is something that a lot of GMs do, and I think those are the situations where they're more willing to fudge the dice and not let bad things happen to their players. Then there's the other camp where it's like, what's the word, verisimilitude or whatever.
Are you talking about DM versus player?
No. I'm talking about
Side
the
of
GM not
forging the
willing to
result?
let their players fail versus the GM treating everything as it happens and saying that this is an immersive game, people
Yeah.
die, things like that. Um, there's a word for it where it's like verisimilitude, I think is the word, something like that.
Verisimilitude is definitely
Where like yeah, so I think that
it gets real. Thank you, shiitake mushrooms. That's
verisimilitude, that's it. Where it's kind of like you're immersed in the game world. You're shit's going down as if it would in an actual world, like an actual real world. And that's more my style personally, and I think that term was brought up a couple times in the Reddit comments, where people tended to play that way. And I think a more sandboxy world leans more to that style than a more like epic Lord of the Rings journey style game. But
I mean, sandbox was mentioned many times in the comments section. A lot of people talked about that, as well as a lot of people talked about open world games and being an open GM. So the people who made those comments, you guys definitely brought a lot to the discussion board. Really appreciate you guys and your comments. Um, so
um,
there's always the other end of fudging dice results. If you are giving yourself critical hits, um, ask yourself, why are you doing this? Um, I know there's a this is kind of introspective as far as the video is concerned. What kind of GM are you? Ask yourself, do you fudge your own dice to punish or penalize your players? If you are, get out.
Well,
Stop.
I still think
It needs to be
there's still some saving. Like you could change, right? Don't just tell them to straight up get out. We don't want anyone to leave the hobby by any means, but consider why you're playing the game and what it means to be playing a role playing game before. And maybe it's just the wrong system for you, right? Maybe another system would be better, suitable for your wants and needs. I don't think we should be telling anyone to get out of the hobby, though. That's
I'm not saying get out of the hobby. I'm talking about like when you're in introspective state, you need to get out of that
mindset.
habit.
Yeah,
get out, shake it off. Like your mentality of I need to punish the players. You need to shake that mentality off. Get out of that mindset. There's one of the things I noticed was very few people brought up was the ones in the 20s. One of the things I really don't like as a player, this is my style, I really don't like critical one decks. I think those things are terrible.
critical one what?
Critical one decks. We had them at our old table back at the comic shop.
Oh,
where
the deck of cards that has like things that happen when you get. Yeah, I don't.
So that might be cute in your 5th edition game where you only really roll once. You get to move and then you get to attack. Pathfinder, you have 3 actions. You're going to be rolling 3 times, which probably why there's hero points. 3 times a round, minimum.
Yeah.
And that can happen, every single round. And the chance of you getting a nat 1 is phenomenal. That 5% chance is just, it's coming at you. That 1 is going to come for you eventually. And to penalize you by making you drop your weapon, break your bowstring, or hit an ally, I think it's ridiculous. And it might have been okay in some of the older editions because I definitely did that back in 3.5. Once I hit Pathfinder, I started asking myself, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
I really think that it's humiliating enough to roll a 1 and miss, let alone to sit there and cringe and hope that the GM is, finds you favorable and doesn't have some kind of negative consequence come your way because you failed.
I tend to dislike them for not only that reason, but also a different reason in that as a GM, I already have enough random shit to deal with. And adding some more random shit to that pile is just going to make my job harder as a GM. Like, yeah, like I always said, one of the cards is your head randomly explodes. Like, now, if that happens, I have to somehow describe that and figure out how it connects to what happened, and it's just more work than necessary. It doesn't really bring any benefit
really
to the
jarring,
table.
and it kind of pulls you out of the game.
Yeah.
I just remember watching the comic shop that particular GM, just the toothy grin on their face as they were pulling out the card deck and finding what bad thing happened.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember. Somebody took an attribute damage, and I was just like, "What?" This was a 5th edition game. I was like,
what? I'm just not I mean, for one, I'm not a fan of player decks, but 2, I'm never a fan of taking away player agency like that. So I know there's a lot of things like the deck of many things that can do similar stuff like that. I just never give them out because I don't want that shit in my game.
If you want a game to end, give them the deck of many things. Yeah. Obviously, does Pathfinder have something equivocal to that? I think Pathfinder's a bit too serious to have something like that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Game. I don't think they have something like that, but they may. I'm sure at the very least it's been homebrewed.
People in the comments history and people watching, if you have seen something in Pathfinder that has something like a deck of many things where it could really, derail your game, please let us know about it. I'm interested.
My rule of thumb is if anything changes anything about the character, like without their own effort, without them doing it themselves, then it must be temporary. It must be reasonably short duration. Because I refuse to change anything about a character, like a player's character, without them initiating that change.
There's nothing wrong with consequences to their actions. Love that, but yeah. I don't know. I feel like you're signaling that when you're playing the game, we're all in this together. It is not GM versus player. that stuff does need to be addressed. People do need to be aware that it's a thing. This can really help players from being in suck games to kind of get out of those suck games and into a better game. Maybe take the hobby one step further and become a GM and find out, what kind of GM you are.
Yep. The idea of a lawful evil GM is definitely a thing, and one I'm not super enthused with, but it's actually fairly common.
Lawful evil GM.
That's the term a lot of people use for it. But,
Interesting.
so yeah.
Homebrew versus module. We kind of touched base on this. I am so proud. There's so many people in the comment section talking about how homebrew was such a motivator for them. We talked about the prep work, but homebrewing, almost, I think, let's see how many times homebrew appeared in the,
a lot. There was a lot of people who said that they never run a module ever.
Yeah, 7 different people commented about in, how many comments is this? It's like 40 something comments. Yeah.
So
30 comments, 7 people.
I'm a bit of a hybrid here in that so for one, I always world build all my worlds. I never use Galarian or Forgotten Realms or any official setting. I love world building. That's one of my favorite parts about being a GM. And so I do it. But I also and all my stories are written by me as well. But I also like to take small sections of modules or adventure paths or whatever and remold them into something that fits in my story just to save myself time. So like Paizo's bounties they started releasing are great for this. There's really short, like 1 or 2 hour quests basically that you go back, boom, you're done. And I love taking these, reflavoring them, changing things out, maybe changing some encounters, and then putting them in my game. And it saves me so much prep time. Because unlike Jack, I don't prep everything all in advance. I prep everything before the session, based on what the players did last session and what they're trying to do going forward. And sometimes I get this wrong. So it's also good to have some of these in your back pocket that you can just like throw in randomly. If they do go a route you didn't expect and you didn't plan anything, it's good to have one and be like, aha! Like, I got you. Yeah, we are very much a duality of GM. That's funny. Yep. And that's what I think makes us get along so well is that we do have different perspectives on things, but we respect each other's, perspectives on it. So,
respect is a huge thing. Respecting your players, big deal as a GM. I know that doesn't really cover under what kind of GM you are, but as a person, you guys have got to respect your players, and you players, I know it shouldn't, goes without being said, respect your GM.
This is a collaborative game, right? Everyone's in it to play, to have fun together. You're not, like Jack said earlier, you're not trying to, it's not a 1 versus 5 or whatever, right? You're not ganging up on each other. So
you can't quote published lore to me, Munchkin, if it's homebrew. Oh, I love that. That's hilarious. Alos in the comments there. That's one of the things that I didn't like about running a module game. When I ran Mines of Phandelver in 5th edition, there were parts of the story where I was just like, this does not jive well with this module. And I kind of had to go, okay, it's time to go off the beaten path. And
well, you also have the issue that 5e modules are typically pretty terribly written. So you had that issue to deal with as well. Especially their first one where they were still kind of learning the system.
Would have been well written. You think that they put in their right foot forward when publishing Mines of Phandelver. You would think that.
Yeah, it was their first published adventure with 5e, right? Paizo's first published adventure was also notoriously pretty bad, but for a different reason. It was well written. It just was hard as fuck. It wasn't balanced at all. But yeah, I mean, everyone has their and actually it's a good point. When you are starting off as a GM and you haven't run, or even just your first time running on a specific system, it can behoove you to start off with a small module just to get your feet wet and then expand on it. If you want to do homebrew stuff, sorry, the sun is setting a bit, so it's like my lighting is like changing rapidly. But anyway, as you start to get more familiar with the system and that adventure comes to an end, if you want to start doing homebrew, then just kind of branch off, start doing your own thing, extend it however you want. Like that's a great way to get started if you're, worried or intimidated or just unfamiliar with something.
That is definitely some good advice. I noticed that at the end of Minds of Fendelver, it kind of suggested that.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I want to give kudos to them for pointing that out. They said, at the end of this adventure, you should be X level, time to buy a new module and go on a different adventure. But there was a little clause there where it said, go ahead and start homebrewing from this
Yeah.
point. So I was like, I kind of like that they had that in there.
Yeah. I haven't used too many looked at too many Paizo full-on adventure modules, so I'm not super familiar with how they run it. But I have run a couple 5e modules in the past, and one of those was Storm King's Thunder, and while I didn't really like the module itself, I did like how they tried to have sections of the module that were just sandboxy and let the GM just kind of do whatever the hell they want. And said just basically by the time you get done with your shenanigans, players should be this level to move forward, kind of deal.
I agree. I didn't like. I don't know. Giants are boring.
Yeah.
Sorry, not sorry. But I noticed there's a table of contents in the beginning parts of that book, where it talks about like the different side quests that it recommends you go on and like what level the party should go on, and it was actually pretty diverse.
Yeah.
And so I was pretty impressed that they had. It was not linear.
It reminded me like Final Fantasy 13, where you started off on this like linear path, and then at some point it just opened up to this wide world. And you could kind of do whatever the hell you wanted, and then after you're done with that section, it went back on rails and took you to the end. But,
the only module I found remotely interesting after that, of course, I think I said this before, was Ravenloft, or what is it called? Castle Strahd?
Curse of Strahd.
Curse of
Which
Strahd.
actually came before Storm King's Thunder.
That one was printed before. That one.
That was like
when I first read it, it went right over my head, and I was like, "Oh, they're just like being difficult for the sake of being difficult." And that was my first impression of it, and it is not the final impression. I feel like my first impression was way off. Way off. I ended up getting Ravenloft, the board game. It's I want to say it's like a 4th edition board game.
I have it actually. I never played it, but I got it as a gift years
so much
ago.
Fun. Because before we went to online gaming, I was buying all of the game boxes because they came with figurines.
There was a time where every time I was at the comic book store, which was at least once a week, I would buy one of those random mini boxes. That was like my guilty pleasure. So
it was totally my guilty pleasure. I was getting one for my birthday. I was getting one for Yule, and then of course I found this evil delivery system where I could just buy them and get it delivered straight to my house, and that was, it's very satiating. Gotta find the right group. So I was collecting all of those miniatures, and this is before, going online. Pen and paper game was all about the tiles. The tiles are amazing. If you're playing on a surface where you can just throw out those tiles, you can really help shape a dungeon. You can kind of give it to your players. They can see, grid-wise what's going on. I do recommend those.
Yeah, I've really wanted to play them. I just haven't had a chance. And like I said, I got it as a gift one year, so I do have it.
I think it's the Temple of Elemental Evil. I liked that one's design the most because that one was more. They do something different with every.
Are you talking about the original Temple from like 1st or 2nd edition, or the
board game?
Oh, the board game. Okay.
The box came with instructions of like how to kind of choose your own adventure and kind of go through the levels. I thought that was kind of impressive. I took that same mindset and applied it to the Ravenloft one. And after I had read the Ravenloft board game, I went back to Curse of Strahd and I was like, "Oh, this is genius. I like this a lot because it really it pits you against such an evil, great big bad guy, and it gives you the option to kind of, it gives you the option to kind of parlay. You can kind of get out of it. Killing him isn't necessarily the answer, although it's probably the best one. But I really felt like the setup who you get onto your side, how you level up. It had like it had a narrative that some of these other modules really kind of lackluster on. You know,
Right.
what your objective is when you're playing Curse of Strahd.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. You don't
Yeah.
always
I
know
mean,
what you're doing.
you have one goal, and it's a more linear game too, as well. From what I understand, I've never played Curse of Strahd, but from what I understand,
It
it's more of a
does seem
linear
quite
story.
linear. It does seem quite linear, but I want to say it's not sandbox. It's kind of, and it's not kind of open world. It's because you can do different things to reach the ultimate goal. So it's not. It is definitely not linear like some of those other modules that we played, Waterdeep or Dragon Heist, where those ones it's like, you know, a series of things are supposed to happen. It's not like that at all. There's different areas that you can explore. There's different NPCs that you can get on your side, and there's different like generals that the Curse of Strahd has that you can kind of take out to kind of make him weaker. And
Hmm.
but we can
Another
tell some.
another area where there were some differences of opinion in the comments was around how close people should stick to the rules. And I think this is actually another part where you and I kind of are on opposite ends of the spectrum here. Whereas myself, I'm of the firm believer that when we're playing a game, we're signing up to play a specific rule set, and if we, any deviations from that rule set should be agreed upon before the game starts. Whereas you are more than willing to just, change shit up, break stuff, fast and loose kind of deal.
I like to make proclamations,
And both of
and go
those are valid approaches. And in fact, it even comes into our homebrew, right? Like your whole magic weapon design system is very different than anything in the the core rule book or the rules written. Whereas I love to design magic weapons, but I like to stick to the formula that was imposed by the core rule book and make my magic weapons conform to that. So both are valid. Both are completely valid ways of playing. One is more careful. One is more fuck it, let's do it. And both are completely valid. But those are somewhere else that I saw in the comments. A lot of people differ of opinion.
I really do like that you bring up magic items. I love Diablo looter style games, and as much as I liked implementing that into my games, I think I'm going more favor towards more custom made loot for the group, for the party. I have so many loot tables of magic items, just constantly making random magic items, and one of the things part of prepping, it kind of helps build your world when you decide what kind of magic items are in your world. That helps you as a GM kind of make interesting NPCs, because you're going to make their gear that they either have built when they were young or lost, or that they died. You actually did something kind of like that recently, and that's like exactly the kind of thing that I'm looking for in my game.
Are you talking about
You have
Urukog, the orc relic?
Guess right.
Yeah.
The orc slaying sword is the exact kind of piece of weaponry that I want in my game, because it's so lore rich.
Yeah.
It's the weapons and armor in like some kind of like Dark Souls game, it usually has an entire paragraph of lore attached to it, and it's going to reference other important NPCs in the game.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how you piece the story together. Take like Lysander's cane. I know we have a player in my game who really likes the cane, and they are dying to know more about who this person is, and so they've been like researching and trying to find who this person was, where did this cane come from. And you guys have already used it in one of the dungeons to kind of solve one of the puzzles.
Yep.
So as much as I like making random loot, I think I'm slowly maybe just changing over time to making less random loot.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with distributing random loot, but it definitely opens up doors for game breaking, right? If you end up generating a piece of loot that ends up just being super OP, and then you give it out at like a lower level, then it can kind of have lasting consequences for a number of levels, right? So you have to be careful with it.
That's a mistake that could be made. I haven't seen that happen in any of my games.
Yeah. I haven't seen it happen yet either in your games, but I'm just saying it's something that could happen.
If you're new, this is GM advice. If you're new to making magic items, start simple, start small, and then kind of build upon that there. Get used to, make yourself 100 magic items before you give your players, one item, kind of like do it as something 100 times so that you feel like you're good at it and you're confident at it. And then you can go through the lot of items that you made and be like, I feel like these items are balanced. And you'll start to look at your own items and be like, I got better as I was making these items. Some of these are better designed.
Right.
Some of these are more balanced. And
you also tend to lean more towards the enchantment style of magic items, where like basically any item can be enchanted to have certain properties to it. Which that's where I was kind of getting, it kind of deviates from the original design of magic items in Pathfinder, which is fine. But whereas me, I'm a bit more careful, and I'm like, okay, Pathfinder has specific rules for magic items, so I want to make sure I use those to maximize the chance that what I'm building is actually balanced.
yes, but they're just not enough for me.
Yeah.
I need more.
And that's fine. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just
in my group. I have so many crafters in my group, people who take the skill and get trained and expert and master in crafting, and then what do they use the skill check for? They don't.
Well,
ever
I
get
mean,
a chance
you can still craft magic items, right? You can craft. Just have to add and what you do is basically property runes in Pathfinder 2. So you could craft you could craft an item. You could add a rune to it for fundamental rune to it. So whether potency or striking rune, and then you could add however many property runes you have slots for in that item. So you kind of get the same thing. It's a different approach to doing it.
I think you guys like crafting the items when you monster hunt. You go out there and you get those rare ingredients.
Yeah.
I think, this is my interpretation, players correct me if I'm wrong, I think you guys enjoy getting those rare materials, bringing them back to your hub, and putting your crafting minds together and going, what can we make with these? And then making something interesting.
Yep.
I think you guys get the most reward out of that, and that's the kind of game that I want to play.
Totally agree.
And one of the things that I don't like about dishing out all those random magical items is that the whole point was that if the item didn't fit your niche, if it didn't fit the party, you guys are supposed to sell it and make money. And that profit is supposed to help keep the party, at that gold level.
Yeah.
But I have a group of people who hoard everything. Next episode of Hoarders, let's go through our magic item list and, how many items you guys made what was that Google Doc thing you guys
Excel
made?
spreadsheet, or basically a Google sheet.
You guys made a Google sheet just to house all the magic items you were holding onto, and there were items that were spec'd for you guys that you didn't equip, and I was just like, I felt so bad because I keep handing out these items and no one's using them.
Yeah.
It's moderation, Alos, moderation. You should drink with them sometime.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I like doing that too, but I just like to fit it into the rules that are already there. And I love the idea of relics that they came up with. I think that's an awesome middle ground between just a regular magic item and like an artifact. But relics are cool because they grow. I don't know if you get it from, they grow with the character. So as you do something, it could either be your character levels up, or it could be some task you need to complete. But as you do this, you unlock more action or abilities of that weapon kind of deal, and whoever's holding that weapon can use those abilities. So it's kind of cool.
The relic idea is great, but the abilities that they suggest, they're kind of bland. They were pretty...
Well, I don't really... A lot of the abilities they suggest are built pretty heavily into their world, so I don't typically use them much.
Yeah. From the hip, the artifact ideas and all the rules surrounding them are great. I love weapons that scale. 3.5 had something like that. And Pathfinder, I know, had the same thing, and so this is just them getting it right. They're getting it better. But the sample magic items that they made, they feel like starter Pokemon. Like, they feel so generic.
The magic items or the relics?
The relics that they made, all of the rules.
Some of them are pretty good. Some of the elemental ones had some neat abilities on them. They weren't, all of them weren't great, but you had to remember a lot of them are like starting out at level 1, so they can't get too crazy.
Yeah, I'm not saying that I want them to be crazy. I'm just saying that they felt, the four corners of elemental generic.
Yeah.
Like it was finding Faraga in all of your Final Fantasy games.
Yeah.
It was, I don't know, it was lackluster for me. Maybe somebody else feels differently about that.
Yeah, I don't think they're too bad. But I mean, like I said, I homebrew all my relics anyway, so I might use their abilities they have as starting points and like the ideas of what kind of power level I'm looking at certain levels. But I typically do my own thing with them anyway. But conceptually, I think there's an awesome idea.
Here's some of the GM styles that didn't get mentioned. It's really hard to talk about these things because this open discussion is confession style.
Mm-hmm.
One of the topics that we have slowly croached on was about giving and being stringent with the magic items. So I think, John, you're pretty good at giving loot. I feel like I was giving away too much loot, and I kind of drained it back. And now I'm kind of, ebbing and flowing, kind of with the party.
So I think there's an interesting dichotomy here. I think my theory is that when GMs that come to Pathfinder 2e from a game like 3.5 or Pathfinder 1e or even 4e, where magic items the game was designed for players to get magic items out the wazoo, then they're more willing to dump those magic items on the players. However, GMs that started their career or maybe played most of their career with like 5e, which is a game that is very much designed to hold back those magic items. 5e is a game that actually breaks very quickly if you start to give out too many magic items, and it's actually designed so that the players should only get a couple magic items throughout the course of their careers. So I think GMs that come from that game are more likely to be stingy with the magic items, and I think that's where you get this dichotomy of players who some of them are more willing to give them out than others, and I think it's more of just a background experience.
Right. And if you're playing Pathfinder, those enemies are designed around you having an optimized party with runes on your weapons. So GMs, if your players are reaching a certain level where they should have runes, you either need to stop them and explain to them what they should be doing with their golds. If they refuse to listen to your advice, then it's time to start giving them the runes that they need for their weapons. Otherwise, the balance for the encounters, it's gonna get rough for them.
Yeah, very much so.
You've especially got to be
especially if you're using the encounter the monsters from the bestiaries, because
wild.
Unlike a lot of games, the Pathfinder 2e bestiary actually works like really well. But like Jack said, it expects the players they're up against to have the certain criteria of equipment, or otherwise it falls on its face. So
even Nethes works well. I mean, if you have Nethes as a resource, those monsters, those creatures that you're pumping out, there's just an option, a tab, and you can just
those are just from the bestiary version,
right? Make it a more elite version, just right on the fly. It's a great slider system if you're not homebrewing, or if you're looking to do some homebrew and reskin. Nethes is gonna be your go-to. Don't forget to buy those bestiaries. I love those artworks in them.
But yeah, the counter building rules, in the Gamemaster guide work really well. Unlike 5e and some other systems where they're kind of not so great or tend to fall off at certain levels, the Pathfinder 2e encounter building rules work great. But like we said, they do expect your party to be decked out in the right gear for their level, or they're not going to work that great at all.
So to cover some other real quick ideas, John, how do you feel about realistic versus unrealistic or pseudo-realistic? How do you feel about that in a game that you're GMing?
What do you mean by realism?
So realism would be, if you're trying to play it ultra realistic, you are playing with physics, thermodynamics. You're trying to make it grounded and sound in how things physically work in real life compared to a game. Whereas some people kind of throw that out the window and explain it away saying it's magic.
As I mentioned earlier, I'm very big on verisimilitude, so I don't necessarily think that everything has to work exactly like it works on Earth. I mean, we are playing a fantasy game, right? So there's things that just naturally break the natural laws of physics we have in our real world. But whatever you do has to make sense within the context of the world, and it has to be consistent. Those are my rules. If you know, if magic is a thing, why is it a thing? You know, if it could just be that the gods bestowed the power upon them. Okay. Well, how does it work? I mean, is that something that matters to your game? I mean, maybe it just is a thing that is just divine in nature and just, it doesn't have a clear meaning, or maybe no one knows the meaning. But anytime you make a decision about something that deviates from what we are familiar with as human beings, then it needs to make sense and it needs to be consistent with the rest of the world. That way that, because when players are in a fantasy world, or not even players, if anyone is experiencing a fantasy world, whether it's tabletop RPG or movie or TV show or whatever, some degree of familiarity is better than no degree of familiarity. If you have something that's just completely off the fucking walls and doesn't make any goddamn sense to the people, which I've never actually seen that implemented, but it wouldn't work. Like, people would be so confused and thrown off the rails, it just wouldn't be a thing. So
I've
I think that some
seen that kind of.
familiarity is great. Like when you're building a world, maybe make typical geographical rules that might have make sense to the average person. Like rivers, follow the path of least resistance, or they start at higher levels and come down, kind of deal. So
So like some of those questions for those physics and thermodynamics that you just touched on makes me remind me of, like, I watched players argue about is like casting fireball underwater. Would you let somebody cast a fire spell underwater?
depends on the world I was in and if it made sense for that world. But if I said yes, the player can cast Fireball Underworld, then any rulings I make in the future that are similar have to follow that, because that is a canon thing that I've made in my world and said, hey, the laws of nature work this way. So how else does that matter? Can torches be underwater? Is it something unique to the Fireball magic spell that lets it be cast underwater? Like, there has to be something that grounds it into the reality of that world, and it makes it consistent with the rest of the laws of nature. So that's, I guess, it's a long-winded answer. But as with most things, the answer is it depends.
Some people have said in the comments, and I've dealt with other players who are ultra realistic. They stick to realism as much as they possibly can, and I have other players who don't,
Mhm.
and sometimes they can collide in game, which is interesting. Casting a fireball on somebody who has ropes tied behind their back. It wasn't always written explicitly in the rules if it catches things on fire
Mhm.
nearby that you're touching or that you're holding, and so players would try to use that to free people, or um, the GM would rule that the bound person that you cast a fireball on is now freed.
Yeah,
So it
I
goes
mean,
in favor
if
of
that were
either
if
one.
that were running in that scenario, I would personally rule it as, yeah. I mean, it's going to burn the rope. Um, just because that's a situation where I think natural familiarity with the player would make sense, and I think it's something that is a creative use of a spell. I would also say that, okay, it burned that rope. What's the building you're casting in made out of? Wood. Sure, it's going to burn that too. That's where the consistency comes in, right? Like, if I
Mhm.
if I make an exception to the rules for something, it better be consistent with the rest of the rules, right? And that's kind of the deal I'm going for.
And I use heat metal to increase the temperature in my enemy's iron found in their blood. Okay, that is an awesome spell. That would probably fall under blood magic. So if the player doesn't have blood magic, I'm gonna rule no. If they are using blood magic, that's something I'm open to.
Hmm. I would rule no, just because it breaks so much shit, and the amount of iron in the human blood is actually fairly small. So I would rule that targeting that iron with heat metal would be extremely, extremely difficult and not really easy to control. So I would probably say no, personally. But
So let's say you're playing in a Full Metal Alchemist game. That kind of thing might be,
I think
pretty
that would be
prevalent.
an awesome idea in a Fate game. Just throwing
Oof.
that out there, where the rules are a bit less stringent, and you could have crazy
Well, from
things
what I
like
understand,
stunts
there are
that
no rules in Fate.
somewhat. I mean, like, you have the idea of stunts, which are literally there to break the rules of the game. So you could
I'm really
do.
interested to see how Fate compares to Paranoia. I'm looking forward to playing between those two.
We'll see.
I mean, rules wise, as far as jamming goes, for a keeper being Call of Cthulhu, I'm really interested to see what kind of keeper I end up being. Um, as far as how Fate goes, I want to see if your style of gaming is different from Pathfinder to Fate. I noticed you're pretty consistent from 5th edition to Pathfinder. So I want to see if there are any, like, if you
My
feel like there's
style of
different
GMing is different because the systems are so different that I couldn't possibly have the same style of GMing as I could in Pathfinder, even if I wanted to.
Hmm.
Um, and it's hard. It's a difficult thing to explain until you've actually experienced it as a player or a GM, because like for one, there's no concept of maps at all. So that's one thing where it might be weird for you, who loves their map making. So like, there's not even a way to play Fate with maps. There's this things concepts called zones, for instance, which are basically abstract concepts of areas. Like one zone could be the lower floor of a building, while another zone could be the upper floor. Or you could just have one zone that is the whole building. Like it just depends on what the scene is and what you're trying to accomplish in that scene, that how your zone would be structured. But even if you have that, there's no concept of movement in a Fate. As long as you can reasonably move within the same zone, then you just do it on your turn. There's no like you have X feet of movement or whatever. So things like that. There's also no concept of like roll me a perception check or blah blah blah. It's like no, you have 4 actions. You pick the right skill for whatever that action is, and then you either have passive opposition or you have active opposition, and it just doesn't play out like a typical Pathfinder or Dungeons and Dragons game would. And I can't wait to run a game of Fate to you guys, just so you can see how different it is. And I have the suspicion that some of you at least will not actually like it. But I'm hoping that some of you do, so I keep playing with you. so we'll see.
I am not going to say no to somebody else GMing for a change.
Um,
Not going to say no.
yeah, I mean, it's always great to be a player sometimes too, right? And I think that playing different games and experience different rule sets can actually increase your arsenal or your tool belt in other games, right? Like I said, like a lot of the stuff I've learned playing in GMing Fate has a lot given me different perspectives on things in Pathfinder 2e and 5e that have changed the way I've GM'd those games. So expand your horizons, expand your palette, kind of deal,
Playing starting from 3.5 and then making my own tabletop RPGs as a kid in high school and having my friends test them out. I had a very obscure style of starting out, forever GM for 15 years, and then so my style of GM is little on the different side.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that we got to talk about what kind of GM we are. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Next week, we'll be talking about problem players. We've talked a little bit about it, but I feel like there's enough information to kind of go forward with it. So we'll be posting in Reddit. So find our Reddit, comment in there, talk about what kind of problem players you guys have experienced, whether it's just the titles or appellations for these players or examples. Talk about how you guys solve those problems, or how the GM solved the problem, or if the problem, was unresolvable. We're interested to hear those stories.
You want to plug the subreddit real
Yep.
quick, Jack? It's /r/the art of Gamemastery. A little inconsistent, I know, but there's some rulings around usernames and what they can be and whatnot. So
absolutely.
We will put that. I believe it's already in the YouTube description, and we'll also put it in the comment there as well.
So I'm gonna hit
and as we mentioned at the beginning of this video, make sure you like this video on both Twitch and YouTube and Odyssey if you watch it there. Subscribe to us, follow us, all that stuff.
I do like the quality of Odyssey, not gonna lie. I was impressed.
Yeah, Odyssey's really cool. It's got a long way to go, I think, to catch up to YouTube, but I think it's a lot of YouTubers are at least dual posting now, so there's getting a lot more content. I think it's going to be a cool thing in the future. We'll see. Fingers crossed. But Yeah, I mean, maybe we'll post another question about problem players in the Pathfinder 2e subreddit and get some others' opinions there as well. I kind
Oh
of like
yeah,
the idea of getting other people's, you know, opinions themselves and kind of incorporating them into our show because I think everyone has a different perspective on things, so seeing what those are
we're a
is always
community,
useful.
and the community doesn't exist without you guys. So that's why we'd like to hear from you guys. Do we have any other closing statements to go over?
Don't think
Um,
so.
we'll be, we'll be posting a new religion as soon as I get
Oh yes, the new
John's
deity
feedback
that Jack
on that.
created. We'll be posting that. We need to get some art for it, and I'll throw it up. Um, I am still working on Dancer. I apologize it's taking me so long. I've been extremely busy, and I'm going to be extremely busy until probably the end of the year. But I have finally decided how I want to go about it, and I've decided on a few of the feats already that are going to be associated with it. So I just need to write those down and polish it up a bit. But hopefully, I have something soon for that. I have the art already; it's waiting to go. So yeah, maybe get some new monsters in there too. We'll see.
I've got a few monsters, just still doing some final play testing on them, doing some final tweaks, and talking to an artist about getting some artwork for that. So we want to make sure it's like nice and polished before we send it your way.
Yeah, we'll probably
Maybe
start
in the
doing a lot of
future,
a lot more posts, more blog style posts as well on like things we uh, learned from certain sessions or certain games or how certain things from other systems can be incorporated in other systems and whatnot. So we may look out for those as well. We'll start doing those as well. Maybe some homebrew rules, things like that. We like to make the website a bit more fleshed out with content, so we're looking to do that in the near future. If you guys have idea for stuff you'd like to see posted on the website, let us know. We will absolutely look into doing that for you.
absolutely what John said. I was literally about to say that. Like our minds synced.
But we are a bit over the hour at this point, so we won't keep you much longer than this. Until next time, happy gaming.